Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this session. So, after hearing AI being said about 1 million times in the last 6 hours, we're going to take a short break from that. We're going to take the A out of AI, out of the word, and just focus on I, which is the big I impact. And when I looked at the title, there were two things that stood out for me. One being driving and the other shifting. Now, why are these important? Driving because we cannot create real impact unless there is intentionality. We need to steer capital with purpose, with conviction, and not leave outcomes to chance. And shifting because we're living in extremely volatile times. We're looking at macroeconomic headwinds. We're looking at fiscal tightening. We're looking at global inequalities widening, whether it's gender, whether it's income-based inequalities. And we're living through times that economists call polycrisis. And in times like this, just navigating is never sufficient. We need to move with deliberate intention, thoughtfulness, as the ground beneath us keeps shifting. And really nowhere is this truer than in the case of human capital investing, because the way we invest in people really determines the future and how resilient we actually make our economies and societies. And in that context, we're framing this conversation in 4 parts, looking at the 4 dimensions, or as we call, the 4 shifts that we see shaping the future of human capital investing, especially at a time when most capital providers, whether philanthropies, private sector investors, governments, facing conflicting, challenging priorities. And the question no longer really is whether private capital is and should be driving outsized impact. Rather, how do we create the right structures? How do we create the frameworks to be able to drive some of that at scale? So very grateful to be joined by a panel of experts here. Each of them bring very unique, differentiated lens to this conversation. So very happy to unpack this further here. So the 4 shifts that we're examining today, which are sort of shaping the future of human capital investing, are across how we mobilize resources, how do we scale, how do we really value and measure outcomes, and finally converging into how do we reframe education as an investment in resilience. So with the first shift, Paul, I want to start with you. We have statistics around the annual funding shortfalls that education is facing globally, close to $100 billion. And this is even when all governments meet their spending commitments. So there is something missing in this. Something potentially that philanthropy or government subsidies may not have been able to fill as yet. So tell us, what was the motivation? And you at Save the Children Global Ventures are, in a sense, turning the philanthropic legacy of Save the Children into more structured, scalable, market-led models. Tell us about what was the motivation behind Save the Children Global Ventures? How are you balancing market and mission? And how are you making this move from episodic philanthropy to more scalable, marketable solutions?
Thank you. Great to be with a whole range of colleagues to be discussing these. Test it now. Beautiful. All right, I'm away. Excellent. So I'm sure many of you know Save the Children, until this year, about 25,000 staff. We're now down to about 20,000 staff, thanks to the global ODA cuts. 110 countries, but about $2.5 billion of annual turnover. But almost all of that is just what I would call traditional funding, so philanthropy and grants. And if we think about the global overseas development sector, even at sort of peak ODA in 2023, we were talking about $230 odd billion. And we all, I think, pretended that that was somehow going to mean that we achieved the Sustainable Development Goals when we knew that the funding gap was at around $4 trillion. So even before all of these ODA cuts, we only had about 1/20th of the capital that we needed. So I do think that, and I put Save the Children and, you know, I've got other colleagues from other large NGOs and UN agencies in the room, we were living in what I would call la-la land, you know, where we had these missions and we were never going to achieve them. So we had to get serious about crowding in development finance, private sector capital, leveraging development donor advised funds, all of those sorts of things. But to go to your sort of second part of the question, Nandita, how do we do that without losing our soul, without losing our mission? And that's, you know, that requires a little bit more nuance, I think. For us at Save the Children Global Ventures, it starts with the realisation that the sorts of work that we do within Save the Children is another tool in the toolbox. It's not the toolbox. So absolutely, everywhere I go, we still need grants and philanthropy, we need overseas development assistance, and we need to advocate for that. But we need to be smarter about where we allocate that capital and then look for those opportunities, like we're doing with KIES Invest on the Generation Empowerment Fund, where we do some smart structuring that allows us to crowd in private sector at scale and uses the sort of very precious catalytic philanthropic money that is available to us much smarter than we did in the past.
Thank you, Paul. Yvette, I want to come to you. The, you know, your work at the Family Philanthropy is, you know, centered around advancing education in Asia, but using a very collaborative, innovative approach to philanthropy. So coming from that lens, tell us, what do you see as the current role or the futuristic role of philanthropy? Is it filling gaps? Or is it really about taking more bolder venture-style risks to catalyze innovation?
So I guess I represent, you know, more the Family Foundation funder side. So that's the lens that I come from. We're not a giant family foundation. You know, we're a small family foundation, but our ambitions are no less than the giant ones, I think. So I wanted to kind of step back a little bit to see, to kind of share why I'm even here today. Asian philanthropy traditionally has been tied to businesses. So they, you know, it's like, you know, you want to donate back to the community that where you're from, the cities where you're doing business in. You know, it's kind of an extension of corporate CSR. So that would be kind of on the business side. But also traditionally, on the family side, it's been tied to legacy. Like, you know, I want to put my name on a building. I want to give scholarships. And that's the way that I think my grandfather and my father's generation thought about philanthropy. So while they're very interested in education, their way where they think they're making impact is through providing scholarships, hardware, buildings, and endowing professorship. There's actually a generational shift in mindset, maybe influenced some by what we see are considered best practices globally. There's also because a lot of people in my generation have had the benefit of being exposed to the world. And so we realized that, you know, to give away money, a lot of times, you know, I've given a scholarship. I've given 100 scholarships. Now what? A lot of times people don't even know where those 100 people are and what they're doing. So I think people in my generation are starting to think more deeply about, if I am going to give this money away, it's not a gift, it's actually an investment. And so how do I make this investment more purposeful and have a longer term impact? And you know, I'm happy to share with anybody the journey of our own family foundation, but I don't want to take away time from the other panelists.
We'll come back to that. But moving then to, I mean, it's clear, therefore, the role of philanthropy can be multiple, right? Catalytic, absolutely, but can traverse across so many sort of roles in the whole capital chain. But that brings us to our next shift, which is if once we mobilize capital, the next challenge is just as critical, which is how do we ensure that this capital is used such that ideas don't remain pilots or proof of concepts, but they really grow on to become more, system-led marketable models. And there, Michael, I wanted to, we were talking about some of the work that you're doing at the with the Innovation Accelerator and some of the other competitions that you run. Tell us how hard is it to translate research into practice? How do you bring some of these initiatives into real sort of real life examples, successes on the ground from some of these exercises?
That's a great question. Is this on?
No.
No.
Slow it up. Yeah. No, it's on.
Is it on now? Thank you. Before I answer your question, I just want to say there are cataclysmic factors happening now. The comment you made about what has happened, we're seeing grant monies dry up, international development monies that have disappeared. If you take Holland IQ's tracking of invested capital in EdTech, for example, it was 21 billion in 2021. It's 3 billion, 21 to 3 year to date. So we're not at the end of the year, but we're 3/4 of the way through the year. Philanthropy is reimagining their role. It always used to be, I want my picture taken next to the caramel macchiato, but I don't want the vendor, I don't want the building, I don't want the barista, can't be in the picture, I just want the caramel macchiato. And now they're thinking differently about what that impact can be. So we're thinking about that too. We also recognize there are huge other shifts that are happening in terms of what capital is available. And we haven't even discussed the multiple trillions spent on education systems across the world. We've really talked about a small fraction, which is some of the private components of the public system. So where do you make a difference if you have a percentage, a small percentage of that? So we don't have the answer to that, but we have thought about how research matters. And it came out in the conversation, I think it was Rahman this morning said, if you're building on foundational fundamental research, then you'll actually get something you don't have to measure. You already can take that for granted and then go from there. So we did create something in our continuum of programming for entrepreneurs who are starting education businesses and early stage companies to think about how they could be accelerated and supported in different ways. And the center I run is called Catalyst, so our accelerator has to be called Catapult because there was no other choice. And what we do is we think about the 4 lanes of acceleration, and this is true of any business: leadership, product, market, and finance, and trying to support those leaders and the leadership teams moving along those lanes of acceleration and being able to support that work while they're thinking about the foundational research upon which their solution was built, but also researching what they're doing and evaluating on the way so that they continually improve the solution so that's actually addressing where they are in the first place and then the broader system beyond that. And then there's the capability and thought that it can't be just for now, but it has to be for the future and thinking about scalability and sustainability. That's a whole other level as we think about that work, but thinking that we're building this together, that you have a whole ecosystem of supporters, many people who want to help, and making sure everyone's at the table.
But do you have any sort of examples of successes that you've seen specifically where you've had some of your accelerator founders, build something that's tangible and of size?
Yeah, we've seen a lot. We also, I didn't mention this, run something called the Milk and Pen GSE Education Business Plan Competition. We had our finals. I don't even know what day it is. It's kind of mid-October. It was early September. And the finalists came from all over, one from Singapore and Indonesia called Solve Education. Do you know Solve? Yeah. So they're doing extraordinary things, thinking about AI as a tutor and really thinking about a scalable solution.
We also had folks really attending to how do you get access to, again, as you were hearing before about having some human in the loop, how do you get prepared and see visibility of how you could actually be prepared and ready to go to university. And there's a group called College Contact where they have near peers in the university who have a similar demographic, and it matches you based on the AI demographic profile with students who are in a university you might want to attend, and they can tell you, what is it like? How do you feel there? Do you feel welcome? What got you in? How do you think you made that leap? Because you can't be it if you can't see it.
Amazing. No, thank you so much for sharing that. Paul, you've been intentional about designing for replicability. I want to know some specific features, whether design, product design, governance-led features. What is it that has seen replicability, not just across markets, but let's say across sectors, across asset classes, debt to equity? What has worked?
Yeah. So I love this question because my pet hate is we're doing another pilot. Pilots don't change the world, and so it's we've got to be thinking right from the outset with real intentionality this question. So it's a really important question. I just want to make a distinction at the outset from what I see as platforms, which is where you have, if you like, a single platform that you invite multiple funders to. So it could be a fund, but I mean, the best example that we've done that is actually not in the education space. It's in the nature-based solution space where we, Save the Children Global Ventures, run or develops these high-integrity carbon credit projects with communities in developing countries. And with a whole range of law firms, starting in London, we created a platform. Now, I had initially 8 London law firms all doing all the legal documentation. It was a nightmare to get 8 London law firms to agree on any legal document, can I say. But we got there, and we've now got this platform, and we invite other professional service firms to join, and really anyone that wants a high-integrity carbon credit. And the platform's been designed to be scaled across multiple projects, multiple geographies, and obviously multiple investors in perpetuity. So that's sort of a platform play. And then the second one is sort of replicating a product. Some of you in the room know that Save the Children Global Ventures and KIES are working together on an Africa debt fund called the Generation Empowerment Fund. And again, right from the outset, we've been thinking about, well, we do this first fund, and it's a proof of concept. Still needs to be at sufficient scale, so we're targeting $100 million plus of funding going into low-cost schools in Africa. But everything that we're doing, from the selection of partners, the selection of, and that could be the financing partners, it's partners like KIES Invest, Global Ventures, that have got a sort of global viewpoint, right through to the structures that we're establishing, that we can just replicate it and replicate it and replicate it. So it's this sort of intentionality of design right from the outset.
Thank you. Yvette, from your perspective, what helps philanthropies back lasting solutions? What do you look for? Do you look for leadership, patient capital, collaborations? What is it that you look for? Data?
So as I mentioned earlier, I think there is kind of a generation shift in the mindset of philanthropists. When we meet with our peers, we do, talk about sustainability and scalability, in the programs. We still talk about pilots. Sorry, Paul. And that is maybe it's in the space that the geographic area that we're working in, because we're working in Hong Kong and China primarily, and in Hong Kong in particular, the reason why we still talk about pilots is that Hong Kong, like Singapore, is a very wealthy city, and the government basically traditionally provided funding for everybody. Right. So, from healthcare to education to NGOs. And they're very used to doing business or providing the models of operating is based on output. Right. So how many kids do I serve? How many centers have I opened? oh, I can have like 50 classes to teach the elderly computers, but not so much what has that actually done. So, the shift that we are trying to drive when we talk to these organizations that have generally been funded by government or large, our community chess organization has been around forever, and it's a large funder, the Hong Kong Jockey Club. They are used to thinking in an output type model. So what we are trying to do with our pilots when we talk to them is to say, look, we're not an ATM. We will give you multi-year funding, but you've got to have, I need an exit strategy. So you need to think about how you're going to scale and where you're going to take the program when I exit. So that's maybe a small way in which we're driving the change in mindset and the culture of the smaller nonprofits that we're working with, as well as the large ones, in fact, because everybody is used to this other funding model.
Have that. No, clearly, scale without recognizing the value is like progress without recognition, right? So we need to, as we solve for scale, the deeper question, which gets us into our next segment as well, is about pricing, the true value of education. And innovation, resource mobilization, all of this is great, but ultimately it translates to what the true value is. And for that, Michael, I want to go back a little bit to sort of interlinking to the first point around the fact that there is this huge funding gap that we're facing. We also know, both anecdotally as well as through numerous statistics and data that we've been able to gather, that education has direct impact on livelihoods, positive impact on livelihoods, economy, GDPs, etc. So why? It seems obvious, but we're still grappling with this challenge around attracting sufficient funding. Sufficient is a very sort of, I think, big word, but we're still struggling with attracting capital to the segment, to the sector. So what's really the challenge? What's the gap? Is it the narrative? Is it the fact that we've not been able to present evidence the right way? Where do you think this is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit. One is, we talked about this, one of the panels this morning talked about this notion of how funders think and what timeline they think around. What is the material return they need on their fund? What are the metrics they have to meet? And all the details connected to that. Very much tied to expectations. And I think what we found is those who are more patient, this is a word that came out this morning as well, those who recognize that selling into the education system and marketplace takes some time, adoption takes time. If you're going to a large education system, it might take 2 years before you even get the chance to put a bid in, because that's you teach English language arts, and that's when the curriculum comes up for adoption. Others have shorter cycle time, but recognizing that and understanding that is kind of the, it's the table stakes required to have a conversation with a funder, and recognizing that they understand the complexity of the system. And you've now heard 6 hours or 7 hours of the complexity. In addition, recognizing that as a solution provider, you actually have to make a case of what's the value add. What is it that you uniquely provide? Where can you solve one of the intransient and permanent problems in education? How can you address these things that don't change? And what is your theory of action tied to the conversation, but not stopping with inputs and outputs, taking that conversation to outcomes and ultimately to impact. And that's a very complicated situation to have a conversation around, because not everyone's as patient. People are varied on their value proposition and what's possible. And having a shared understanding, and I'm sure you have this as you have conversations with potential grantees, you have to come to some terms. And one of those is actually have a business model, and a business model that's viable and sustainable and doesn't depend on philanthropy, but gives you the chance to be successful in earned revenue and making sure that you're not as reliant as you had been on philanthropy, but have a viable possibility for sustainability and scalability. And then I think it's also, as you said, it's about making the case. We're not always so great. There's lots of acronyms. People are very tied into their language. But if we just spoke in plain English, I think we'd do better.
Maybe AI can simplify it for us.
Maybe that can help.
Paul, any quick thoughts on outcome-based financing? Do you have any?
Yes. So, I mean, I think there's two issues that we've got to separate. One is what's the outcome that we're wanting to generate, and actually, in some senses, I think we can solve that. There's some standardisation. We can do that. I think that the bigger problem is there sort of outcome-based funders at the sort of scale that's needed given the size of the problem. And I think that's the challenge I see, at least in the international development sector when it comes to education. So Save the Children is currently implementing outcomes-based contract in Sierra Leone in education, another one in early childhood development in Australia and Tasmania with very disadvantaged communities there. We're probably pitching for about another 2 or 3 of them at the moment. I think almost all of them are going to be pilots. $5 to $10 million worth of funding. And then when I come in and say, so who is going to buy these outcomes at the scale that mean we're going to have meaningful impact? And everyone looks at their shoes. And they'll say, government. Well, have we priced this at a point that makes sense from a government education budget? And have we done that work? And often we haven't. And so therefore, a great initiative with some great outcomes ends up, like lots of other great initiatives, not scaling and not having the impact that we ultimately want it to have. So who are the outcome funders at scale has got to be a key question for us.
Okay. And I wonder if one day we'll be pricing education like carbon credits. I mean, that's food for thought for all of us, but maybe. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but that's just a question out there. Maybe we will one day, nevertheless. Yeah. But that kind of, brings me to the fourth dimension, which is when we create value, when we're able to measure the value really, it leads to, the next logical step is really reframing and changing the perception, right? Because that's when we can redefine where education sits in this whole mental equation, whether it's an expenditure, is it a balance sheet asset, is it consumptive, is it capital formative, those sort of very fundamental questions. And to unpack that, I think one important element that we were discussing earlier was just collaborations with governments, because government plays a big role. And how do we, what's the right way to approach this, to think about it in such a way that it's no longer subsidy-based, grant-based, but it's rather a co-investment in the future in resilience.
I see you looking at me. I guess I'm the one yes. to answer that one.
You've had some success there.
We have an experiment going on in there. I should say probably the easiest way for me to address that is actually talk about a program that we're very excited about that we've been funding. So the word, collaboration. There is no other way that you can institute any kind of systematic change in education without collaborating, frankly, with government. And so in China, we've heard this morning about how important the age group 0 to 3 is. And in China, I have my cheat sheets here so that I get my numbers correct. So in rural China, there have been studies that have shown that 49% of the children 0 to 3 have cognitive delays, 30% have motor delays, 50% have social-emotional delays, and 52% have linguistic delays. And why is this important? Because 0 to 3 is the most critical years of development of the child's learning capacity and growth potential, and later on career prospects. Now, I've also been told, and I haven't read the studies myself, but who and other global organizations have shown that an investment in ECD can lead to a 7 times savings in social welfare and related spending, and increased earnings leading to increased tax revenue, as well as a 32% reduction in adult cardiovascular disease. I'm not quite sure how they measured it, but that's in the study. 32% increase in future earnings. Now, China is a country with a rapidly declining birth rate. We're not going to have enough babies to help service the aging population. And so if China is going to develop from a middle-income country to a high-income country, it really needs to fully realize that it's human capital all around. And so in order for us to do that, there were several funders who have been funding early childhood development in China, ourselves included. And we realized that while we may have had some success in the counties or even the province that we're working on, we're never going to influence the system. And we're not quite sure, who's going to step up to the funding afterwards. So as a result, we formed this early ECD collaboration with 5 other funders to make sure it's properly credited. It was actually an initiative that was started by the Gates Foundation. But Gates brought together the Hong Kong Jockey Club, Enlight Foundation, which is based in the US, but they also have a China Foundation, Tenoto Foundation, Lee Foundation based in Singapore, and ourselves. Because we were all interested, not just in help in ECD, but we're very interested in see how the collaborative funding model works. And the reason why we're so excited about this is because it wasn't like, oh, somebody had a program, it's very successful, let's all give them some money to scale that program. This was, everybody had a goal, and we decided on the mission together. And then we had no idea how to get to that mission, and the 6 funders, together with our 2 on-the-ground implementation partners in China. One is CFRD, which is China Foundation for Rural Development, and then the other one is CDRF, China Development Research Foundation. So those are preeminent NGOs in China. One is going to help drive policy change, so they're going to write policy papers, and the other one is going to work with on-the-ground county, village NGOs to deliver active parenting services to parents with kids in the 0 to 3 age range. And the hope is that we can drive policy change, but also provide the government with a model. If you are going to have policy change and you have money for this, and this is how you should spend your money. And to address the issue on the money side, the model that we have that we know it works is $3,000 renminbi per year. And we checked with the Ministry of Health, and they said you need to get it down to $1,500. So the innovative program part with CFRD people are working with is trying to find models where we can get it down, where the government spend is $1,500, but that it also includes getting some copay from users. So we're trying to figure out the whole thing and then present it to government and say, please adopt this.
I like how you faced me when you said the money. I'm the money.
Okay, I see we are
You're the face of the money.
just running out of time. Any questions from the audience that we need to open? Jay, do you have a question? Oh, okay, one question, yes.
Jetu's being strict with us. If it's a good question, he might give us a second one. Come on, it's a challenge.
Everyone's waiting for coffee.
Sorry, it's not, again, it's not really a question. It's more like a problematization. And to go back to Yvette's comment about an aging population and what do you do when you need an influx of human capital or human beings to care for an aging population. I'm a passionate student of history. And so we've seen models of where you had, and you still see, encouraged immigration to really take the place of those functions. In Germany, you had the tradition of the Gastarbeiter, or the guest workers, etc. You also have policies in place which encourage reproduction to increase the birth rate. And then, of course, and I think where the AI really plays a potential role is the increasing reliance on automation. You automate things that can be automated, and then you encourage your workforce to actually retrain the youthful youth force to prioritize like human-centered professions where a machine can't take that role. And that, of course, does affect the education. Every one of those policies affects the education system and how it responds to this challenge of handling. I see people are laughing on the panel at my comment. So I will actually hand it over to you to say, what are your reflections on that? Is there something where we can actually think outside of these pillars of traditional response to aging populations?
Sure, I'll try in the minus 2 minutes we have. I think, yeah, time. Oop. Is that what oops? I think we find ourselves in this moment in time, and maybe we can leverage what seems to be the strongest gene in every country, which is global competitiveness, and recognize that you'll be left behind. And we've had this conversation before. Your society will be left behind, the health of your country and the people in it will be left behind if we're not ready with a prepared workforce that has to be educated in a rapidly changing time. It's worked with showing PISA results and saying, oh, we want to be number 14, we're only number 17, and other things along the way. So I think one way is actually for policy to change, to be proactive in that. And we also spend way too much time on the what and very little time on the how. And we have to spend much more time on the conditions in which innovation can flourish.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks, Paul, Michael, and Yvette.